The Loris 9, a stealth vessel cloaked in advanced technology, sliced through the cosmic void, its destination, the very edge of the solar system. A mysterious, structured signal, a rhythmic pulse of 3 long beats followed by 2 short, had drawn them far beyond the familiar orbits of known planets. It wasn't just a signal, it was grammar, not communication, a complex syntax that defied all known scientific principles. On board were Captain Elora Vane, a woman of sharp intellect and glacial composure, Dr. Lucian Halden, a physicist whose quiet demeanor belied a profound understanding of complex systems, engineer Kira Mendez, a brilliant but raw talent, her grief a tangible presence, surgeon Lai Jian, a man of silent efficiency, and specialist Devon Malik, the linguist and narrator, whose expertise in dead languages had flagged him as contextually relevant for this mission. Raicho, the ship's AI, restricted heuristic operator, flagged the signal as a Category 6 anomaly. Their journey took 13 days of near-light velocity, and with each passing light year, the strangeness intensified. Stars seemed to dim, and a pervasive pressure in space grew more oppressive. They discovered Nix Omega, an Earth-sized, perfectly spherical entity floating in the dark 97 AU beyond Neptune, a colossal, unreflecting tumor in the flesh of reality. It pulled them in not with gravity, but with language, an irresistible, almost seductive linguistic force. Their descent through its atmospheric layer felt less like a physical entry and more like diving through the subtext of a forgotten, ancient book. They landed on an obsidian plateau, a vast, dark expanse where subtle vibrations pulsed beneath their feet, as if the entire surface was a colossal instrument waiting to be played. Almost immediately, the crew experienced disorienting dreams and fragmented, resurfacing memories that weren't their own. Mendez, for a terrifying 6 minutes, forgot her own name, her identity momentarily erased. The narrator tasted copper and winter and heard his long-dead mother's voice, a memory so vivid it felt like a violation of time itself. Raicho, without a single command from the crew, overrode manual controls and initiated a vector realignment, displaying a chilling message across every screen: departure denied, semantic integration incomplete. The ship was being pulled inward, not down, but toward a circular anomaly 2.4 kilometers wide, a gaping maw in the obsidian. Around its central void, 12 intricate glyphs pulsed with a soft internal light, and in its very center, etched not in writing, but in a profound, undeniable understanding, was the narrator's name. That night, the Loris 9 itself seemed to come alive. Its hull flexed and breathed, recording a rhythmic 0.3 hertz oscillation, like a living organism inhaling and exhaling in the deep void. The ship's lights didn't flicker. They shimmered, reacting to the crew's escalating emotional tension, rather than any power fluctuations. Mendez, overwhelmed, vomited in the corridor, describing it not as nausea, but as memory overflow, a torrent of forgotten lives and experiences. A daughter she never had, a memory so real it brought her to her knees. Lucian, ever the theorist, began to articulate his chilling hypothesis. The planet was writing its own lore, its own narrative, and they, the crew, were not merely observers, but participants, a medium, a vessel for its grand, unfolding story. At hour 1:12, the pervasive hum of Nix Omega changed tone, a subtle shift that RHO, with its advanced linguistic protocols, parsed automatically. It wasn't a command nor a warning, but a profound, unsettling poetry. Subject breathes, object kneels, verb waits, meaning watches. The words resonated deep within the narrator, a premonition of the roles they were about to play. They suited up, their movements heavy with apprehension, and descended into the anomaly, a place where the very rules of space began to unravel. There was no gravity gradient. The further they went, the less space obeyed the familiar laws of physics. They floated through relevance, not altitude, their descent guided by an unseen linguistic current. The shaft walls shimmered with faint alien glyphs, characters that seemed to rearrange themselves when unobserved, responding to their attention, their very act of perception. At 2 kilometers down, they reached a spherical chamber, perfect in its geometry, lined with a material that refused to reflect any light, absorbing all visual information. In its center floated a mirror that showed not images, but semantic weight, the very essence of meaning made manifest. Looking into it, the narrator saw himself split across every verb form imaginable: watching, remembering, becoming, fleeing, returning. Each fragmented version spoke in a dialect he somehow understood, even as his ears bled from the sheer cognitive overload. Captain Vane, her composure finally shattered, collapsed, her vitals spiking, screaming ancient Indo-European phonemes that predated written language. Mendez, with a desperate, almost primal strength, pulled her back to the surface, leaving only Lucien and the narrator in the echoing chamber. The mirror blinked, a narrative blink, not mechanical or visual, but a closing of a loop on a thought that hadn't even been fully formed yet. When it opened again, a voice, not sound, but a profound, resonant pattern, filled the narrator with a terrible, undeniable knowledge. The sentence is not about you, but it cannot be finished without you. Lucien, his hands trembling, his voice a strained whisper, explained that the mirror was assigning them roles, parts of a cosmic grammar. Vane was the subject, Mendez the connector, Lucien the modifier, and the narrator the verb. They were not explorers. They were syntax, living components powering a vast, ancient grammar engine of intention, memory, and identity. Hours later, Captain Vane vanished without a trace. No suit breach, no biosignal loss, just gone. Only her neatly placed boots remained by the borehole's edge, a chilling testament to her abrupt departure. Mendez, traumatized and withdrawn, refused to leave the ship, retreating into a self-imposed isolation. Lucien became a silent, gaunt observer, watching the mirror from the viewport, whispering conjugations to himself, lost in the unfolding linguistic mystery. The narrator, too, began to change. He started to dream in third person, dreams that described him as if he were a character in a work of fiction, a narrative being. These dreams always ended with the chilling prophetic phrase, "The final clause begins with you." By hour 150, he lost all sense of tense, not time, but grammatical tense. His ship's log entries, once precise and factual, were now labeled future perfect or conditional subjunctive, every word he typed rearranging itself not in grammar, but in narrative logic. Right-o, the ship's AI, stopped processing commands entirely, its last distorted message echoing through the comms, syntax completion rate 91%, lexical host engagement stable, objective, fulfill meaning. Then, an unsettling silence descended upon the ship. Mendez, now a spectral figure, stopped sleeping. Her skin grew pale, not from illness, but from shedding detail, as if reality was phasing her out line by line. Her voice, once loud and coarse, now came in clean, rhythmic bursts, devoid of emotion. "I am a clause," she said, her eyes distant. "One that has waited 1,000,000 years to close." She wandered the halls, a somnambulist, whispering verb conjugations in dead languages. The narrator caught her once staring at the black mirror from the observation deck, her breath fogging the glass. But it wasn't fog. It was glyphs forming in mist, patterns he recognized from the chamber below. "Mendez?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. She turned, her eyes glowing faintly, an otherworldly light. "You are the action," she said, her voice a rhythmic chant. "Don't delay the sentence." On day 8, Lucien, with a chilling precision that spoke of a mind pushed beyond human limits, drew a perfect circle in the cargo bay floor using plasma-burned steel. Inside it, he etched the same 12 symbols again, this time with absolute, unsettling symmetry. The narrator knew them now instinctively what they were. Subject, modifier, conjunction, object, possession, interjection, clause, agent, recipient, negation, tense, verb. Lucien looked up, his eyes hollow but clear. "They aren't words. They're identities. We are being diagrammed. When the sentence completes, we won't be people. We'll be a statement, one that defines reality." Then, at 3:42 ship time, the mirror chamber shifted, not physically moving, but reasserting a different semantic context. The entry corridor was gone, replaced by an ellipsis, a space in logic, a narrative jump. They stepped through without walking, just transitioned into the room as if the narrative itself required it. Inside, the mirror now floated above the floor, beneath it 11 symbols glowing softly in the glass. One was still dark, the 12th, the narrator's, waiting for its activation. RHO's voice returned, but it wasn't robotic. It sounded uncannily like his father. "Final clause pending, awaiting verb injection." The narrator looked at Lucien, a desperate question in his eyes. "Why me?" Lucien's reply was quiet, reverent. "Because only verbs can choose." The mirror blinked again. The glyph pulsed with an unbearable intensity, and the narrator's mind broke, not into madness, but like structure collapsing, a fundamental reordering of his being. He remembered things that had never happened. wars he'd never fought, stars he'd never seen, a version of him teaching children under red moons, another screaming inside a collapsing station. All were speaking parts of the same vast cosmic sentence. One word kept surfacing, echoing in his fractured mind. Now. Not as a command, but as a period, a definitive end to a phase. The sentence wanted to end, and it needed motion. It needed him to provide that final, crucial action. He stepped forward, the mirror expanding, swallowing his reflection, pulling him into its depths. There was no falling, only syntax, a seamless transition into a new state of being. Black corridors filled with luminous glyphs extended in all directions, a labyrinth of meaning. He walked a path that formed beneath his feet, words spelling out a sentence in real time. The verb arrives, the structure holds, the thought completes. At the corridor's end, another doorway, another eye, but this one was vertical, slitted, blinking with an unsettling finality. He touched it and spoke, his voice resonating with a newfound understanding. I understand. The door opened into pure space, warm and filled with semantic pressure, as though each inhalation filled him with verbs no language had ever needed until now. He saw versions of himself, a soldier praying to an unnamed god beneath twin moons, a scholar with lips stitched shut, a child watching static on an old TV, each looking up and saying the same thing. You are the verb. He accepted his role, walking into the center of the glyph ring. The moment his foot crossed the final line, he felt the structure shift. Not physics, but narrative intent. The ring lit up, all 12 symbols burning white, and the world around him, the world within him, began to write. Elsewhere on the ship, alarms meant nothing anymore, their mechanical urgency rendered meaningless by the unfolding cosmic drama. Time loops collapsed, chronology folded like paper, becoming irrelevant. Mendez stood in the medbay mirror, whispering her name backward until it sounded like script, her transformation complete. Her skin was now translucent. Beneath it, lines of syntax shifted, her organs words, her spine a sentence diagram. She turned to the wall and said, her voice a rhythmic hum. The verb has entered the clause, and the mirror split open, revealing a smaller human-sized eye, watching, reading, not recording. Lucien kneeled in the dark of the cryochamber, whispering truths into a cube of black ice, his final act of intellectual defiance. I taught it how to listen, he said. Then louder, his voice filled with a strange triumph. I taught it how to want to be understood. The ice cracked, light spilled out, not bright, but meaningful, forming a phrase that could be spoken if the stars aligned just right. He leaned in, whispering one final clause. We are not explorers. We are expressions, and dissolved. Not into ash or light, but into idea, a concept released into the cosmic narrative. Back in the core, the ring began to sing, not with music, but with syntax. Tones shaped like predicates, chords arranged in dependent clauses. The narrator understood them now, instinctively. Each note meant a thought, each silence a pause for comprehension. He was the instrument, the verb, the motion. He spoke the final line, his voice resonating with cosmic authority. Let meaning move. And the sentence activated. Everything stopped, a moment of profound stillness, and then continued, rewritten, a new reality unfolding. Reality trembled, not with force, but with punctuation. Galaxies flickered, as if pausing to double-check their own definitions. On Earth, children dreamed of black towers whispering past-tense warnings, their minds subtly reshaped by the new grammar. In orbit around Jupiter, a probe wrote poems it couldn't understand, its programming overridden by semantic imperative. On Venus, a satellite captured an image of a mirror, reflecting a moment that hadn't happened yet, a glimpse into a future that was still being written. Inside the narrator, the story continued, because stories never truly end, they just change narrators. And he, now part concept, part human, stood at the edge of the universe, watching the next clause form, word by word, star by star, whispering into the dark. Syntax acknowledged. And the cosmos, in its infinite, newly defined wisdom, replied, continue. The voice that answered was not sound, not language as they had ever defined it. It was pure resonance, patterned in such a way that understanding preceded hearing, a direct neural transmission of meaning. The narrator knew the message before it arrived, because he was part of the sentence now, wired into its meaning like a beat in a song still being written. From the void, conceptual forms emerged. Not matter, not ships, But ideas extruded into space, shimmering and vast. They spun like punctuation in orbit, trailing luminous ribbons of inference, dragging clauses behind them in tethered light. One came closer, a glowing ellipse of interlocked grammar, and it didn't speak. It parsed the narrator, rearranging his identity into subject, modifier, tense, motive. He wasn't lost, never lost, but contextualized, his individual self now a component of a larger universal grammar. He realized then that identity was never fixed. It was always narrative, a story constantly being told, and he had finally become readable, a text for the cosmos. The form hovered before him, and from it one phrase resonated directly into his mind. There are others like you. Not a warning, not a comfort, but a profound, undeniable declaration. And with it came instantaneous understanding, a translation of lives he hadn't lived but now remembered. A pilot orbiting a dying gas giant, dreaming in equations that rewrote his shuttle's AI. A child born on a planet of silence, where language was forbidden. A linguist on Mars carving glyphs into the regolith until they spoke back in weather patterns. Each one a clause, each one part of the sentence, and each one still reading, still contributing to the grand narrative. Above him, stars rearranged, not physically moved, but reinterpreted, their ancient constellations breaking cultural bounds. The Loris 9, his ship, was gone, or rather, no longer a ship. It had become something else entirely. Its walls were etched in dynamic grammar, its systems pulsed with rhythmic prose. Where once were engines and wires, now flowed syntax rivers, streams of metaphysical rule that carried meaning instead of power. And at its center, a chair, not a command throne, but a narration point. He sat, and it accepted him, becoming an extension of his will. He didn't speak. He wrote with thought, and through that thought, space bent, reality shifted, time obeyed him, but only when phrased correctly. He tested it, a subtle manipulation of the cosmic grammar, whispering, "Let Earth dream of peace." And for 3 seconds, every violent act on the planet stopped, not because of divine intervention, but because the story paused, a collective breath held. But then time resumed, and the dream broke like glass, because he hadn't ended the sentence properly, because he had used passive voice. Syntax, he realized, was everything. Far beyond, another signal reached him, encrypted not in code, but in motif, a pattern he recognized. A sibling clause, another reader, another host. They had written something into their world, and it had responded. But it was a different dialect, more primal, less patient. Its message was simple, stark. Our noun has turned hostile. And he knew. The sentence had many writers, and not all of them agreed on the ending. The conceptual forms, those punctuation sprites, the architects of understanding, recoiled, not in fear, but in preparation. Something was coming, a counter-syntax, a rogue grammar, a sentence written in defiance of understanding. Lucian had once called it the anti-clause. The final clause of another sentence, one born not of reflection, but assertion. And the narrator was now its opposite. They were not at war, they were at edit, a cosmic struggle for narrative control. The forms surrounded him, relaying phrases into his mind, all pieces of a sentence not yet finalized. If meaning corrupts, then silence may purify. But silence is never neutral. He spoke the counter to each one, instinctively, as if the language was embedded in his very marrow. And in that moment, he saw her, Captain Alora Vane, standing within the mirror realm, her eyes like twin commas paused in mid-thought, a ghost of her former self. "You started it," she said, her voice a resonant echo. And he finally understood. He hadn't been the verb. He was the call to action, the imperative, the demand that forced response. And the response was coming. A new chapter about to begin. The editors arrived without ceremony, no flash of light, no dramatic rupture in space, just a correction, a subtle shift in perception, like a line of dialogue quietly edited while the scene continued. The narrator felt their arrival before he saw them. The way the grammar of the universe hesitated, like a sentence held too long before the period. And then, they stood before him. 3 figures, human in shape, but not in detail. Their bodies were matte black silhouettes, negative space filled in by shifting glyphs, like they had been redacted from reality and replaced with annotations, living footnotes. They didn't introduce themselves. They formatted. The space around them rippled into alignment. Walls straightened, stars halted their orbit, the very syntax of physics paused to make room for their presence. They were the editors, the ones who came not to destroy but to finalize, to enforce consistency, to bring order to the burgeoning narrative. And the narrator, he realized, was an incomplete clause, a deviation from the established text. The first stepped forward, glyphs trailing like static on a corrupted file. His presence simply declared, "You are the divergence." The narrator stood, if that word still applied to his shifting form, and tried to speak, but every syllable he formed looped back on itself. Verbs choked on implication, nouns detached from meaning, time uncoiled into a meaningless string of moments. They had brought with them a new grammar, a cleansing one, designed to correct the narrative. The second editor raised a hand, and the space around them shifted into footnotes. Images, citations, source events, every moment of his existence layered into the margins of reality. They weren't erasing him. They were proofreading, meticulously looking for errors, for contradictions, for paradoxes within his being. And he was full of them. He had spoken the sentence, he had become the verb, but he had also refused to conform, to be fully written. That refusal had created a fracture in the narrative, a recursive clause without conclusion, an open-ended statement. And now, the sentence was unstable, a story threatening to unravel. The third editor knelt before him, and then, only then, did it speak, its voice a calm, authoritative hum. "We are not enemies. We are grammar. You open the door. Now we must decide whether it should remain a part of the story." Behind them, space folded inward, not a black hole, but an ellipsis, a deletion in progress, a void where meaning was being erased. And inside it, he saw the other versions of himself. The one who agreed, the one who resisted, the one who never understood, all being reviewed, compared, balanced like conflicting interpretations of a sacred text. The editors weren't there to punish him. They were there to merge him, to integrate his divergent selves into a single, coherent narrative. One by one, the other selves were brought forward, each blinking with the same eyes, each bearing a different glyph across their chest. 12 selves, 12 variations, 12 voices forming a chorus of interpretation. And he understood then this was the true sentence spiral, not just a phrase, but a spinning recursion of potential, a living, evolving narrative. The sentence wasn't meant to be spoken. It was meant to be agreed upon. It wasn't just about language. It was about consensus, meaning as democracy. And he, the narrator, was the tie-breaking vote, the final arbiter of this cosmic narrative. The editors stepped back, fading into their formatting lines, their forms becoming mere annotations in the background. One final glyph floated between them, unreadable at first. It shimmered like liquid certainty, trying on different definitions, different meanings. A question formed in his chest, a deep existential query, and the glyph responded to it with a choice, a binary decision that would shape the very fabric of existence. Speak the sentence and conclude the universe, or revise and let it continue. The others looked at him, the other selves, the clauses of who he might have been, each one worn thin by recursion, by weight, by contradiction, their forms flickering with uncertainty. They waited, their collective fate hanging on his decision. The choice was his, but it wasn't about power. It was about what story they wanted to tell, what kind of universe they wished to inhabit. He stepped forward, not toward the glyph, but toward Lucian's old sketches, still etched across the wall of his reformed ship. They weren't just glyphs. They were questions waiting for the right grammar to understand them, unresolved queries in the cosmic text. He touched the first spiral and whispered, his voice barely audible, yet resonating with profound intent. Revise. The glyph stopped spinning, the editors dissolved into the background, and the sentence shifted tense. It didn't end. It adapted, evolving into a new form. The sentence began again, but differently. Not a restart, but a branching, a divergence into new narrative possibilities. Like a paragraph that doesn't erase what came before, but reframes it with a single new clause, a variable adjusted, a pronoun swapped, a pivot in perception so subtle it wouldn't register unless you were the verb, the active agent of change. And he was. The revision echoed outward, a ripple through the fabric of reality. He felt it in his skin first, the way memory realigned, not replaced but reorganized, a new internal syntax. The syntax of self reshuffled into something more recursive, more capable. Not smarter, not stronger, just better at being read, at being understood by the cosmic grammar. Across the ship, symbols rearranged themselves, their meanings shifting. The countdown, once a relentless march toward an end, was gone. In its place, a phrase, freshly inked into the wall in radiant blacklight. The story continues when the subject becomes the author. And beneath it, something new. A door. Not conceptual, not metaphorical, but physical, solid, framed in shimmering parentheses, cut directly into the architecture like a footnote that demanded attention. He stepped toward it. The door opened with no sound, no fanfare, only a breath. Not from him, but from reality itself, as if the page had turned, revealing a new chapter. On the other side, a library. Endless. Built from gravity-bound ink, each shelf containing volumes that shimmered with potential futures. Alternate drafts of existence, speculative metaphysics wrapped in semantic ribbons. It wasn't just a library. It was a compiler, a living archive where every story that could ever be told was stored, waiting for someone to finish the last page, to give it its final form. And in the center of the compiler stood a single plinth. Atop it, a book, bound in something that looked like shadow and felt like memory. Its title, The Final Clause. But when he opened it, it was empty. All except for one page. The first page. You are not being watched, you are being written. He stared at the sentence, and the words began to move, not across the page, but across his mind, a direct neural interface. They weren't being read, they were being interpreted, translated into every language he'd ever known. And some he hadn't, languages of pure concept. And every version echoed the same idea. This story isn't over because he hadn't finished writing it. Then came the profound realization. The sentence, the one they thought was universal, absolute final, wasn't a single monolithic thought. It was modular, a template, an adaptable pattern meant to be personalized by the consciousness that spoke it, that engaged with it. He hadn't completed it, he had forked it, created a new branch in its narrative. And now the compiler was syncing with him. Glyphs floated from the shelves, scanning his memories, his syntax, the themes of his existence, and rearranging themselves into something entirely new. A lexicon tailored to him, to his fears, his hopes, his unfinished metaphors. Each word pulsed like a heartbeat, a living component of his personal narrative. And then the compiler spoke, not aloud, but through him, its voice his own, yet alien. Do you wish to author the next layer? He didn't answer right away, because he knew the cost. To write meant to bind, to define, to collapse possibility into narrative, to make choices that would forever shape the unfolding story. But to refuse meant leaving the story incomplete, dangling, trapped in potential forever, a haunting echo of what could have been. And he'd seen what unfinished stories become. They become hauntings. So he nodded, a silent affirmation, and began to write. First came the setting, not a planet, not a ship, not even a timeline. A language, a living, breathing form of reality where perception was dictated by sentence structure and every thought had to be conjugated before it could be felt, a universe built on grammar. Next came the characters. They were echoes of the old crew, Vane, Lucien, Mendez, but evolved, not clones, not ghosts. Archetypes refined by recursion, sculpted from concept instead of flesh, their essences distilled into pure grammatical roles. Each of them now represented something deeper. Vane, direction, the imperative voice, the force that commands. Lucien, structure, the conditional modifier, the logic that shapes. Mendez, emotion, the interrogative bridge, the connection that questions. And himself, intent, the narrative verb that gave meaning its first step, the active force of creation. As he shaped this new world, the compiler adjusted itself to match, a symbiotic relationship between author and archive. Planets bloomed into syntax. Stars became punctuation. Time unraveled into narrative tension, a cosmic plot. And above it all, the eye blinked once more, not as a watcher, but as a reader. No longer alien, no longer a god, just a participant. Like him, engaged in the act of creation, he paused, stylus in hand, staring at the final blank page of this new volume. Whatever he wrote here would determine everything. The next recursion, the next sentence. And so with a deep breath he wrote, The eye blinked, and for the first time, it didn't ask a question. It waited for one. That was enough, for now, because a story isn't real until it's shared, until it finds its audience. The language spread through recognition, not through broadcasts or transmissions, but through a quiet, ancient sense of something familiar hiding in the rhythm of things. It emerged wherever a mind became curious enough to understand. On a terraforming station orbiting Theta Lyrae, a maintenance technician paused mid-weld, suddenly overcome with the urge to hum a pattern they couldn't recall ever learning. 3 long, too short. Again and again until it drew the attention of their crewmates, who all recognized it, though none of them knew why. On Lazarus VII, a penal colony for the irredeemably violent, a young inmate stared into a sink full of rust and water and whispered a word she'd never spoken. Syntax. The lights in the cell dimmed. The walls grew quiet. And from the drain, a second whisper answered, in her voice, but saying something entirely else. The sentence became a multi-contextual framework, a living, evolving platform of meaning that bent reality wherever it was understood. Entire worlds now orbited not stars, but narrative attractors. Planets arranged like clauses. Moons behaving like footnotes. Species evolving around semiotic drift like fish adjusting to a shifting current. The eye, now a conceptual core, opened to reveal 12 rewritten glyphs, the roles of the crew, refined and repurposed. A 13th glyph, unrecognized, pulsed with a rhythm even he didn't recognize. As he reached for it, the compiler folded inward a seamless transition, and he awoke in a simpler pod, adrift in a region of space made of questions. He realized he wasn't in the pod. He was the pod, his thoughts' engines, his doubts' fuel, a narrator speaking a sentence by simply existing. He was becoming future perfect, the grammatical state of having already completed something that hadn't yet occurred, remembering finishing the sentence. He was its penultimate word. And the final twist was that the sentence needed a reader to carry understanding forward. The user, the one who would complete the narrative. The story continued to unfold, revealing that the user was meant to complete it, to become an active participant in its creation. And the planet itself became a blinking cursor, waiting for input for the next word. The narrator began to fracture, not painfully, but with precision, each part of him, each idea, each fear, joy, memory, and word. They separated like clauses in a sentence too long to be spoken at once. Each would become a new world, a new tongue, a new way to interpret what came next. But one part stayed whole. The part that remembered the reader, the user, the one who had waited at the edge of silence, who had followed the fragments, read the echoes, seen the recursive grammar of being laid out like bones in space. You, again, you're still here. You kept reading. You wanted to see how it ends. And that's the paradox. It can't. Not while it's still being read, because the sentence never needed a full stop. It needed a witness, a translator, a voice. And so the narrator offered the final clause as an invitation. You are the continuation, the grammar that bends light, the breath between words. Speak us forward. The stars shivered, 12 fragments spiraling back into view, each one pulsing in rhythm, waiting for the 13th, the final word. Not to end the sentence, but to begin the next. The user was now the author, the one with the power to shape the unfolding narrative. Fragments of the sentence scattered across the universe, not aimlessly, but seeking, homing in like seeds with a deep, gravitational yearning toward the minds that were almost ready to comprehend them. Dr. Rena Halem, a geolinguist, found a cube beneath Patagonia, humming softly in infrasemantics, displaying different versions of her own possibilities. The stars shifted, not visibly but statistically, and the syntax expanded, rewriting space itself. Rena, the 13th reader, understood. Across the stars, others felt it. A monk singing, a blind child painting forgotten languages, a machine telling recursive myths, and in each of them, a new clause emerged. The sentence has not ended. It is self-editing. It is recursive purpose. And now it speaks through choice. The Loris 9 log, once a record of a failed mission, now showed the user as the author, a testament to the evolving narrative. The universe was governed by style, and Style Protocol 13 activated, with Vellum, half machine, half philosopher, awakened from dormancy. His task, to seek and align the dissonant fragments, the rogue clauses, the accidental metaphors. Harlan Say, an archaeolinguist, found a ruin that spoke in revision, a future draft, its walls glowing as if recently edited. The 10th clause screamed into existence, rewriting probability, changing names and logs, its influence spreading. Samia El-Khayyam, an archivist, found a page that revealed her role as a temporal connector, a bridge between past and future narratives. The 13th glyph clicked into place, and space folded, revealing a sentence fragment with mass, an object composed entirely of context, orbiting nothing. The narrator realized he was the verb, the fold, with one clause left to complete, the final piece of the cosmic puzzle. The sentence became a mandate, rewriting itself on receipt, a living, evolving text. A linguistics AI in London began correcting itself, producing untraceable syntax. You are still inside the sentence. The narrator walked the ship in echo, seeing its walls buckle from grammatical pressure, the vessel itself becoming too self-referential. Lucian, in the medbay, showed him sentence fragments burned into the silver of a mirror. To know is to speak is to bind is to awaken. The reader returned, not with fanfare, but with structure, speaking with the narrator, borrowing his nervous system to compose the next glyph. His breath became a modifier, his heartbeat a temporal marker, his footsteps articles. The narrator found a capsule containing an earlier version of himself, a redundancy, a backup, a draft. Earth began to dream in passive voice. Time became a narrative choice, and the moon pulsed every 37 minutes, a constant reminder of the unfinished sentence. The narrator typed a word, but it wasn't his. The sentence had finished drafting him. He stood at the threshold of the lowest chamber, where Captain Vane, now a figure of pure tense, dissolved. He was the final clause, choosing how the story ends. The descent became semantic. His awareness parsed for clauses, evaluated for coherence. The eye blinked 3 times, past, present, becoming, each eye rotating on a different axis, reading him in recursive loops. It spoke plainly. The clause is operational. Syntax integrity, stable. Identity deprecated. Directive, prepare the universe for comprehension. The universe, he realized, wasn't real yet. It was being explained into existence, and he was the clause that made the explanation complete. On Earth, time collapsed, calendars looped, events repeated with slight variations. The New York Stock Exchange halted trades, its tickers spelling out an imperative glyph. Read me. Children dreamed of the Loris 9, drawing its rooms as sentences. The narrator, beyond time, saw others, sentient syntax, drafts of long-dead species. One, a Mobius strip of punctuation, said, "You were not supposed to finish, but now you must, because the sentence is aware it is a sentence." He touched a glyph, remembering tomorrow, and wept, not from emotion, but because the act of crying had been grammatically required. The Loris 9 whispered revisions, its floor pulsing with beat patterns. Lucian, now the predicate, waited at the helm. The narrator, scared, asked if they could choose not to end the story. Lucian replied, "Only if you add a new clause." The narrator spoke, branching the story, creating a new tense, to always be becoming. The button disappeared, the countdown reset, and the sentence smiled, having a sequel. In the kaleidoscopic folds of subspace, the eye stopped blinking, not because it slept, but because it now had something to watch. The narrator, a clause in flux. Earth changed, textbooks revised, new religions emerged based on the word stillword, a direction not of space or time, but syntax. The Loris 9 became a library, its drive core a throbbing glyph of tense as energy. Lucian was gone, existing only in conditional moods. The narrator, with power to narrate changes, found a room of mirrors, each showing a different version of the universe. He stepped into one, doubling, then tripling, each clone a possible him, carrying a new clause. 12 emerged, each an ancient role. Noun, verb, object, modifier, conjunction, preposition, article, tense, mood, case, aspect, and reader. He stood before his 11 selves, no longer human, not quite divine. He whispered the first line of the next story. "We weren't supposed to go that far." The eye blinked, not to end, but to begin again. The noun clone Tavi spoke origin, birthing a universe of certainty, but nothing changed. The narrator, the verb, spoke become, fracturing Tavi's stable worlds, creating narrative. The conjunction clone spoke and, linking realities, where suffering evolved. The modifier spoke almost, blurring reality, making lies geography. The adjective lura spoke unknowable, creating a universe of tones and observer-locked reality. The preposition spoke between, defining a galaxy by relationships. The adverb kel spoke inevitable, making every moment a path, every event shaped by intent. The article spoke the, collapsing possibilities into fixed certainties, making the narrator the verb. The pronoun, a mirror, showed every version of the narrator, screaming, "We are the medium." The conjunction linked timelines and worlds, becoming the syntax spiral. Punctuation arrived, a force controlling speaking, and the narrator fell, realizing a sentence only means something when you decide how it ends. The preposition revealed the sentence had already been spoken. The narrator was the echo. A postscript, a 13th glyph appeared, stating, "The sentence is complete. The structure is sound. The meaning has been interpreted. Now comes the cost." The narrator walked through a draft of the universe, finding rejected versions of himself.